Alright everybody, roll initiative!
Just 5 for me, all of this armor, you know.
19, baby. Agile like a kitty cat.
9.
I got a 24.
Again? Almost all of your rolls today have been above a 20.
What can I say? I'm just lucky.
Bull crap. I smell a cheater.
Cheater.
Indeed, if only our dungeon master would do something about it. Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today, we'll be talking through different ways a Dungeon Master can deal with players who cheat in their games. Now, I think the first thing that we should acknowledge is that I've definitely done my fair share of cheating, mostly at Risk and Monopoly back in my middle school days, but it's cheating nonetheless. And cheaters suck. And a Dungeon Master should do what they can to ensure the game remains fair and balanced for all players. Because that right there is really one of the main issues with cheating, in my opinion. If most of the players are playing above the board, so to speak, but one of them is cheating his little butt off, then that could quickly breed resentment and cause problems at the game table. So, the Dungeon Master certainly wants to take care of that crap quickly. Now, how you deal with a cheater kind of depends on how he's cheating, to be honest. So, let's look at some of the classic scenarios, some of which involve dice and others that don't. Scenario 1. Look, I rolled 16 and above on like all of my ability scores. Really? 16 and above? So you'll actually find this form of cheating when you allow your players to roll 46 or some other system for their ability scores, but don't actually observe them doing the rolling. Come on, really? Do you know how easy and tempting it is for your player to cheat when you use the honor system for a thing like this? Let's get real here. Ability scores are one of the single most important components of PC power, besides a good build and player competency. So if you just trust your players not to cheat, you're making a big mistake in my opinion. But Luke, I know my players, we're all friends, and I know they would never do such a thing. Okay, sure, but remember your girlfriend Susie from 3rd grade, who not only cheated on you with Johnny, but stole your Snickers bar? The first, forgivable, Johnny was way better looking than you, but the Snickers bar? No, that's the ultimate betrayal of trust. And if you can't trust Susie, who can you trust? Anyway, you probably don't know your friends quite as well as you think. And if you present them with every opportunity to cheat at one of the most important parts of rolling up a character, then you're practically guaranteed that at least one of your players will fudge their rolls. Come on, let's be real, folks. So the solution here is to either observe their rolls and preferably have them use your dice, or use the point buy or standard array system. Actually, scratch that. Standard array sucks. Go with point buy for sure. Scenario 2. Look everyone, I roll super high on like all of my dice rolls. Usually, this form of cheating is accompanied by other suspicious behaviors. The quick pick, rolling the dice and then snatching them up super quick before announcing the results. The hover, rolling the dice and holding your hand over them to obscure them before picking them up. The hider, forming a visual barrier around the area. D&D books, monster cans, and pizza boxes all work very well for this. Using padded dice trays and sort of just dropping the dice instead of giving them a good roll off one or two sides of the dice tray. Shoot, I've even heard that dice towers aren't as random as we thought, but I have no real proof of that. Or here's a classic one, rolling the dice a lot for no particular reason, and then every so often, after a really good roll, announcing that you just performed a check. And then you tell what the number was, and it just, oh look, it just happened to be super high. Now the solution I recommend here, after giving the player a solid beatdown, out in the parking lot of course, is taking away those cheating mechanisms. First step, everyone rolls out in the open, so that everyone, especially the Dungeon Master, can see the dice. The best place is in a communal dice tray near the battle grid or the center of the table. Step 2. All rolls must bounce off one or two of the dice tray walls. keep a careful eye on players that just drop the dice. And ideally, your dice tray won't be overly padded because padded trays make dropping the dice into a favorable number much easier. Step number 3, no out-of-the-blue rolls with results just randomly being announced are accepted. A player must first declare what he wants to do in roleplay terms. I want to jump over the pit full of spikes, for instance. Then the Dungeon Master tells them what check is needed. Give me an athletics check, for instance. Then the player rolls out in the open and gives the final result. Scenario number 3, the player with lucky dice. Roll in the open, roll in the tray, bounce the dice off 2 walls, crap, even roll on wax paper covered in peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't matter. Always high results. Not all dice are created equally. In fact, those lucky dice probably are lucky. They're probably not balanced correctly, which results in certain faces coming up with more frequency. And over the course of playing, the player has learned that the dice always seem to roll high, and thus, of course, prefers to use those dice. I mean, this isn't really rocket science, right? However, before you try floating the dice in salt water, or subject your gaming group to several hours of rolling the dice and graphing the results over a distribution curve, I suggest something much simpler. Switch dice with the player. You get a nice pair of dice there, my friend. A little too nice. Use mine for a while, and I'll use yours. No, really, I insist. If they refuse to swap, then make them use a different set of dice. If they refuse, then I think you just exposed a dirty little cheater, wouldn't you say? Oh, and let me give you a pro tip here. Don't be put off when the player acts all affronted by an implied accusation of cheating, because that may happen. It'll either be genuine or feigned, but either way, you gotta stick to your guns. Explain that the consistent high rolls over the course of several game sessions indicate an issue with the dice, and you can't in good conscience let them continue using them. Just make darn sure that it's happening enough to justify action on your part as the Dungeon Master. The last thing you want to do is prematurely imply cheating or accuse a player of cheating, because that's just not cool. Do your due diligence before taking care of business. Hey, real quick, if you're looking for some 5th edition adventures you can use with your groups, or would just like to support the channel, check out the adventures I publish over on DriveThruRPG. They're adventures that I've run for my own groups, and most of them are just a couple bucks, or even pay what you want. There is, of course, a link down in the description. Scenario 4. The player who always seems to misrepresent what their abilities or spells do. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about here. The player who casts Tasha's Hideous Laughter and tells you the enemy gets to make another saving throw at the end of its next turn, so then the characters all pile around the enemy, beat him down into oblivion. And it's only until after the game session that you look the spell up and realize that the monster gets to make a new save each time it takes damage. And that saving throw is made with advantage. Or the monk uses his shadow step ability to teleport 90 feet down the corridor and behind a closed door. And then later you find out it's only 60 feet, and the monk needed to be able to see the spot he was shadow stepping to. Here's the deal. I cannot tell you how many times this happens in my games. Now, I'm convinced that 95% of the time it's not intentional nor cheating on the part of my players. I think most times it's just because some things are complicated, like spells with description blocks that stretch half a page, or things are just easy to overlook in the excitement of the game. However, there are definitely other times that I feel players do it on purpose. I mean, come on. The player who states the beneficial parts of the spell or ability but always seems to conveniently leave out the limitations or side effects? Give me a break. That happens enough, and I'm thinking it's either cheating or the player just doesn't understand how this junk works, like at all. In any case, the solution is rather simple. First, try to have a basic understanding of what your player's characters can do. Now, I know this is hard, and I know that there are folks out there who will tell you that it is the player's job to understand how their characters work. And I do agree that players should. But come on, we all know they often don't. And you're the Dungeon Master, so put your big boy pants on already. That said, it's impossible for the Dungeon Master to know how everything works. So when your players are doing something that you don't fully understand, and especially if something sounds funky, look that ability or spell up at the table. I routinely look up spells I don't know during the game and read it for myself. Now, I know that this slows things down, and I hate to kill pacing as much as anyone, but sometimes it's needed. And if you want to minimize looking things up at the game table, see my first point about knowing how stuff works. Scenario 5. Not keeping track of inventory, such as gold, or spell slots used, or charges expended, that sort of thing. Yeah, this could be a hard one. I mean, you can't just be hovering over your players' shoulders, making sure that they write everything down. That would get super lame super fast. What I do is pay attention to players from time to time when they should be adjusting inventory or marking a spell slot as used. If I don't see them making a note, I'll gesture at their character sheet and say something like, "That was a 5th level spell slot, right?" My players usually get the point. I don't do this every single time. Again, see my point about being lame, but every so often I do a quality control check, if you will. Next, you will generally get the feel of which players tend toward honesty in keeping track of things and which ones don't. Then you know you need to keep an eye on certain players more. I also sometimes check character sheets after the game session because character sheets always come home with me to double check that things were being marked down. If you notice problems with bookkeeping, then I suggest a private conversation with the player. Scenario 6, the bully. You know this dude. He aggressively argues his side of a rule, often punctuated by swearing and derogatory remarks, until the Dungeon Master and other players are forced to accept his version of how something works. A version often supported by an interpretation of the English language that is always anything but standard. Okay, I have absolutely no tolerance for this sort of player. Like, zero tolerance. This is toxic behavior, in my opinion, and I won't put up with it. I will talk to them maybe once or twice, explaining that once I listen to their side of things and make a ruling, that they need to drop the issue and accept my ruling. After 1 or 2 talks, in private and in person preferably, if the player continues doing this, he's out of the group. Period. End of story. You can just find a new group to bully. Thank you very much. It is not my job to help you learn how to be a productive member of society, and I won't put up with your crap. Of course, a prerequisite of taking care of business with this type of player is to have a backbone and be willing to confront people and do what needs doing. If that's not you, then I'm not sure I can really help you with that, but it is an important thing to be able to do in life, so I suggest giving it a go when needed. Scenario 7, the guy who looks up monster stats during the game. Okay, there's metagaming during combat, not cool, and then there's just flat out cheating. If you catch someone doing this, chances are it's not the first time. A dude that does this gets 1 warning in my games, if that. And then he's out of there. Now, some folks will suggest homebrewing every single monster to avoid this sort of thing. And I can appreciate changing monsters up a little to spice things up for your players. However, changing monsters because you have some cheaters in your group is never something I'd recommend. Deal with the root cause of the problem, the cheater. Don't make more work for yourself because you've got a wang rod in your group. Let us know down in the comments if there are other forms of cheating you've encountered and how you would deal with it. Next week, I'll be going over how to run a session 0, but in the meantime, you can click right here to watch my Dungeon Mastering 101 playlist for more helpful videos. And until next time, let's play D&D.